The hall was already full long before the lights dimmed. People had come after work, some with friends, some alone, carrying tired bodies and easy smiles. It was meant to be a relaxed evening, not too serious, not too heavy. The kind of event where people clapped, laughed, and forgot about their problems for a while. Soft music played in the background as people found their seats. The stage stood quiet, with a grand piano placed slightly to the side, its surface shining under the lights. The host stepped out with confidence, cracking a few jokes that made the crowd laugh. The mood was light. Nobody expected anything unforgettable to happen that night. It was just another show, another evening to pass the time. Performers came and went, each doing their part. Some were good, some were just okay, but the audience was kind. Applause came easily. As the night moved forward, the host looked around the hall and smiled. He said it might be fun to try something different. Instead of another planned act, he asked if anyone from the audience wanted to come up and try the piano. He said it was just for fun, nothing serious. A few people laughed. Some looked around, curious but unsure. Most people avoided eye contact, hoping not to be noticed. For a moment, no one moved. The silence felt awkward, and the host joked again, saying he wouldn't bite. That was when a hand slowly rose near the back rows. It was hesitant, almost unsure, as if the person might pull it back at any second. The hand belonged to a woman sitting alone. She looked average in every way. Simple clothes, no bright colors, no signs of confidence. She didn't look like someone who wanted attention. People around her glanced over, surprised. A few whispered to each other. Some smiled, thinking this would be funny. The host spotted her raised hand and pointed toward her, asking if she really wanted to come up. She nodded slightly, then stood up. As she walked toward the stage, her steps were slow. It was clear she was nervous. Her shoulders were tight, and she kept her eyes low. The audience clapped politely, but there was laughter mixed in. Not mean laughter, but the kind that comes from low expectations. People assumed she would play a few wrong notes, maybe laugh at herself and then leave the stage. That was usually how these moments went. A quick joke, a short memory, nothing more. She climbed the steps to the stage and stood there for a second, unsure of where to go. The host guided her toward the piano and asked her a simple question about whether she had played before. She gave a small shrug and answered softly, in a voice barely picked up by the microphone. It wasn't a clear answer. Some people leaned forward, trying to hear. Others didn't bother. She sat down on the piano bench. The seat seemed too big for her, or maybe it was just her posture making her look small. She adjusted herself slightly, placing her feet on the floor, her hands resting in her lap. The bright lights made her blink a few times. From the stage, she could see rows and rows of faces staring back at her. That alone would have been enough to make most people freeze. The host stepped aside, still smiling, clearly expecting a short and playful moment. He told her to take her time. The room settled into a quiet buzz. Some people pulled out their phones, ready to record what they assumed would be a funny clip. Others whispered guesses about how this would go. She lifted her hands slowly and hovered them over the keys. Then she stopped. Her hands dropped back to her lap. She took a deep breath. It was the kind of breath someone takes before doing something they're not sure they can handle. The silence stretched on longer than expected. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. The host glanced over, wondering if she was having second thoughts. Inside her mind, memories stirred. Old rooms, old sounds. A piano that wasn't as shiny as this one. Long hours spent practicing when no one was watching. Moments of joy mixed with moments of doubt. She hadn't planned to come up here. Her hand had moved before her mind could stop it. Now she was here with nowhere to hide. She placed her fingers on the keys again. This time she didn't pull away. Her hands trembled slightly, but they stayed in place. She closed her eyes for a brief second, shutting out the crowd, the lights, the expectations. For that moment it was just her and the piano. The audience waited, not knowing that this pause was already part of something bigger. To them it was just an awkward delay. To her it was a choice between walking away and letting the moment pass, or staying and facing something she had buried for years. The hall was so quiet that even small sounds felt loud. The soft hum of the lights, the distant shuffle of feet. The host stopped smiling, sensing that this moment was different from what he had expected. Still, no one truly understood what was about to happen. Her fingers pressed down, slowly at first, as if testing the ground beneath her. The very first note had not yet sounded, but the air already felt heavier. Some people leaned forward without realizing why. Others stopped checking their phones. Something in the stillness held their attention. She paused once more, her hands resting on the keys, her shoulders rising and falling with one last deep breath. Whatever happened next, she knew it would matter. The hall held its breath with her, unaware that this simple invitation, meant only for fun, was about to turn into something no one would forget. The moment stretched longer than anyone expected. Her fingers rested on the keys, but no sound came out. From the audience, it looked like hesitation, maybe even fear. A few people exchanged looks, wondering if she would back out. Someone near the aisle whispered that this was taking too long. Another person quietly laughed, thinking the awkward pause was part of the joke. On the stage, the host stood still, unsure whether to step in or wait. He had invited her up for a light moment, something quick and harmless. Now the air felt different, not tense in a dramatic way, but heavy, like something unseen was about to fall. She was not thinking about the crowd anymore. In her mind, she was far away from the bright hall. She remembered small rooms where the walls were thin and the keys were worn. She remembered practicing when the house was quiet, playing softly so she wouldn't bother anyone. Back then, music had been her safe place, a place where she didn't need to explain herself. Her hands moved slightly, adjusting their position. The piano felt unfamiliar, smoother than the ones she knew before. Still, the shape of the keys was the same, white and black, order and space. She reminded herself that nothing else mattered in this moment. Not the whispers, not the phones, not the expectations. In the audience, people grew restless. Some leaned back, crossing their arms. Others leaned forward, curious despite themselves. A few phones lowered, as if people sensed that recording an awkward failure might not feel right anymore. The quiet had become uncomfortable, but also strangely gripping. The host cleared his throat softly, then stopped himself. He decided not to interrupt. Something about her stillness made him pause. She didn't look lost. She looked focused. That difference, though small, mattered. She pressed one key very lightly, barely enough to make a sound. It was almost a test, a whisper of a note that disappeared as soon as it arrived. A few people in the front rows noticed and stilled. Others didn't hear it at all. She pressed another key, slightly stronger this time. Then another. The sounds were slow, spaced out, like careful steps on fragile ground. It didn't sound like a song yet, more like someone remembering how to speak after a long silence. Some people frowned, confused. This wasn't funny. It wasn't impressive either, not yet. It was something else. The laughter faded completely. The hall grew quiet again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was watchful. Her shoulders relaxed a little as the notes continued. Each sound gave her more control. Her fingers began to move with a gentle purpose, connecting the notes into a simple pattern. The piano responded easily, filling the space with warm sound. A woman in the front row stopped tapping her foot. A man who had been checking his phone slowly put it away. The music was not loud, but it carried. It reached people without asking permission. The host stepped back further, giving her the stage without meaning to. His smile was gone, replaced by something closer to respect. He had seen many performers, many confident faces. This was different. This was someone uncovering something personal, right in front of everyone. Her breathing changed as the music grew steadier. The shaking in her hands eased. She leaned in slightly, listening to the piano as if it were answering her. The notes began to flow more naturally now, no longer forced or careful. In the middle rows, someone whispered that she was actually good. Another person shook their head in surprise. No one laughed anymore. The room had shifted fully, though many didn't realize it yet. The music was still simple, but it carried feeling. It didn't try to impress. It didn't rush. It moved at its own pace, inviting the listener to slow down and follow. The kind of playing that came from memory, not practice alone. She opened her eyes for a brief moment and looked at the keys. Then she looked out at the hall. Hundreds of faces stared back, quiet and focused. Instead of fear, she felt a strange calm. For the first time since stepping on stage, she felt like she belonged there. She closed her eyes again and let her hands move more freely. The melody deepened, growing fuller. It was no longer just a test. It was becoming a story told through sound. In the back rows, someone who had been ready to leave early sat back down. A person near the aisle wiped their eyes without fully understanding why. The music had slipped past reason and gone straight to feeling. The host glanced at the clock on the wall and then away. Time didn't matter now. The schedule didn't matter. He knew interrupting this moment would be a mistake. Her fingers danced more confidently, moving across the keys with ease. The piano filled the hall completely now, wrapping around the audience. Each note landed with purpose, as if it had been waiting years to be heard. The crowd had fallen into a deep silence, the kind that feels alive rather than empty. No coughs, no whispers, no movement, just listening. She didn't notice any of that. She was somewhere else again, but this time it wasn't the past. It was the present, fully and completely. The fear that had followed her onto the stage had finally loosened its grip. As the melody continued to grow, it became clear to everyone listening that this was no accident. This was not luck or bravery alone. This was skill shaped by time and loss and persistence. And though the song had only just begun, one truth had already settled into the room. This stranger was no longer just a guest invited for fun. She was a voice the hall had not known it was missing. The music continued to grow, not louder in a harsh way, but fuller, like a breath finally released. Her hands moved with more confidence now, traveling across the keys as if they knew the way without being told. The piano answered her touch with a rich sound that filled every corner of the hall. People who had come only to be entertained now sat still, pulled into something they had not expected. Faces softened, shoulders dropped. It was as if the room itself had decided to listen. In the front rows, a man who had been smiling at first now stared at the stage without blinking. He had planned to leave early, thinking the rest of the night would be predictable. Now he felt rooted to his seat. The music did not ask for his attention, took it gently. Her posture changed as the piece unfolded. She no longer looked small on the bench. She leaned forward slightly, meeting the piano halfway, her back straight, her movements calm and sure. The fear that had shown in her earlier hesitation had melted into focus. Each note carried weight not because it was loud or fast, but because it was honest. The melody moved like a quiet conversation, sometimes soft, sometimes firm, never rushed. It felt lived in, shaped by time rather than rehearsal alone. Somewhere in the middle rows, a woman felt her eyes fill with tears. She didn't know why. Nothing sad had happened to her that day. Still, the sound reached something deep, stirring feelings she hadn't named in years. The host stood at the edge of the stage, forgotten by most of the audience. He had hosted countless shows, introduced countless performers. He knew the difference between skill and presence. What he was witnessing now was presence, the kind that cannot be planned or taught. Her fingers moved faster for a brief moment, then slowed again, like waves rising and falling. The piano seemed less like an instrument and more like a voice. The hall responded by growing even quieter, as if afraid to interrupt. Phones remained lowered. No one wanted to be the person who broke this moment. Even those who had come hoping for a laugh now felt protective of the silence. The melody shifted, becoming slightly darker, more thoughtful, carried hints of struggle without turning heavy. It suggested distance, patience, and return. Listeners found their own meanings inside it. For her, the music became a bridge. With each phrase, she felt herself stepping further away from doubt. She remembered why she had loved this in the first place. why the sound of keys had once felt like home. She thought of years spent away from music, of choosing safer paths, of convincing herself that this part of her life belonged in the past. As her hands moved, those choices felt lighter, less final. The audience leaned forward almost together. It was subtle but real, a shared instinct to be closer to the sound. The host glanced once more at the clock, then shook his head slightly, smiling to himself. Time had stopped meaning anything. Her breathing matched the rhythm now. Each phrase felt intentional. When she struck a stronger chord, it rang clear and steady, never harsh. The hall seemed to vibrate gently in response. In the back rows, someone who had been skeptical felt a quiet sense of awe. They had judged too quickly. They knew it now. The music reached a point of balance where confidence and care met. It was no longer about proving anything. It simply existed, full and open. Her face remained calm, but inside she felt something shift. A door she had kept closed cracked open. The fear of being seen faded, replaced by a quiet pride. The piano carried her story without words. Every pause mattered as much as every note. She let the silence breathe when it needed to. A child sitting with a parent swung their feet gently, listening without understanding, yet fully engaged. The sound reached across age and expectation. The host noticed the audience as much as the performer now. He had never seen a room change so completely in such a short time. The stranger had not asked for attention, yet she held it fully. Her hands crossed briefly, then separated again, moving with ease. The melody rose, then settled, like a thought coming to rest. Somewhere near the aisle, a man exhaled deeply, realizing he had been holding his breath. Others did the same, though no one spoke. The music felt close to a turning point. It hinted at something coming, something stronger. The audience sensed it too, waiting without knowing what they waited for. She leaned back slightly, letting the last phrase of this section stretch out. The notes lingered in the air long after her fingers lifted. In that space between sound and silence, the truth became clear to everyone listening. This was no moment of chance. This was a voice returning to itself. The hall, once restless and playful, now stood united in attention. Whatever came next, they were ready to follow her there. The music slowed, then softened, as if it were taking its final steps. Her hands moved gently now, giving space to each sound. When the last note faded, it did not disappear right away. It hung in the air, warm and full, asking the room to stay quiet just a little longer. No one clapped at first, not because they didn't want to, but because no one wanted to break the moment too soon. The silence felt important, heavy in a good way. She kept her hands resting on the keys, her eyes still closed, her breathing steady but deep. Then someone in the front row stood up, slowly, without saying a word. The sound of the chair moving snapped the room back into the present. Applause followed, rising fast and strong. People stood. More chairs moved. The hall filled with clapping, whistles, and voices calling out in surprise. She opened her eyes, startled by the noise. For a second, she looked almost confused, like she had woken from a dream. She stood up slowly, unsure of what to do with her hands. Her face flushed as she looked out at the crowd now on their feet. The host walked toward her, his expression completely changed from earlier. There was no playful smile now, only respect and amazement. He held out a hand, congratulating her, and waited for the applause to settle before speaking. He asked her where she had learned to play like that. The microphone trembled slightly in her hand as she answered. Her voice was soft, but steady. She said she had learned a long time ago. She did not go into detail at first. The audience leaned in. They wanted to know more, not out of curiosity alone, but because her story already felt connected to the music they had just heard. The host gently encouraged her to share more, reminding her she didn't have to if she didn't want to. She nodded, took a breath, and spoke honestly. She explained that music had once been a big part of her life. She practiced for years, dreaming quietly, never loudly. But life moved faster than dreams. Responsibilities came. Work came. Family needs came. Slowly, the piano became something she walked past instead of sat beside. There was no anger in her voice, only reflection. She said she hadn't played in front of people in a very long time. Tonight had not been planned. She had come only to listen. People nodded as she spoke. Some smiled with understanding. Others felt their throats tighten. Her words felt familiar even if their own stories were different. The host thanked her for her honesty and turned to the audience, pointing out how easily talent can hide in plain sight. How many people walk through life carrying something special that never gets the chance to be seen? Applause followed again, softer this time, but deeper. After she left the stage, people kept talking about her. Strangers turned to each other, sharing how unexpected the moment had been. Some replayed the video they had recorded, watching her hands, her calm face, the way the room had changed. Backstage, she sat alone for a moment, her heart still racing. The noise of the hall felt distant. She looked down at her hands, flexing her fingers, as if making sure the moment had been real. A member of the event staff approached her, offering water and a quiet congratulations. Another asked if she would be willing to share her contact information. She nodded, still trying to catch up with everything happening around her. That night did not end when the lights went down. Clips of her performance began to spread online. Messages appeared from people who had been there, then from people who had not. Words like goosebumps and unbelievable appeared again and again. She watched one short clip on her phone, standing in a quiet hallway. Seeing herself from the outside felt strange. She barely recognized the confident figure at the piano. In the days that followed, the attention grew. Invitations arrived. Some were small. Some were bigger than she had ever imagined. People wanted to hear her story. They wanted to hear her play again. She felt overwhelmed at first. Doubt tried to return, whispering that this had been a one-time thing, that she didn't belong in those spaces anymore. But then she remembered how it felt to play. The calm, the truth, the connection. That feeling had been real. She returned to a piano for the first time in years, alone in a quiet room. When she touched the keys, the sound came back easily, like an old friend who had been waiting patiently. She realized that night on stage had not created something new. It had revealed something that had never truly left. As she played, she thought about the people in the hall, about how many lives had briefly crossed through that moment, how music had tied them together without asking permission. She did not know exactly what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, the future felt open instead of closed. The invitation meant for fun had turned into a turning point. And though the world had only just begun to notice her, she had finally noticed herself again. The days after the performance moved faster than she expected. Messages continued to arrive, some from people she knew, many from people she didn't. They all seemed to say the same thing in different ways. That her music had made them feel something. That it reminded them of parts of themselves they had set aside. At first, she didn't know how to respond. She read each message slowly, sometimes more than once. It felt strange to be seen so clearly after spending so many years unnoticed. She worried that if she spoke too much, the moment might fade or lose its meaning. She went back to her normal routine, waking early, doing what needed to be done. But something had changed. Even simple moments felt lighter. When she walked past a piano in a public space, she no longer looked away. She paused. She listened. One afternoon, she was invited to play again. Not on a big stage, not with bright lights, just in a small room with a quiet audience. She almost said no. The old fear returned for a moment, reminding her of how easy it would be to step back. But then she remembered the silence in the hall before the applause. The way the music had carried her forward instead of holding her back. She said yes. The second performance was different. There was no surprise this time. No laughter beforehand. People came to listen. Still, her hands shook when she sat down. Courage, she realized, wasn't something you earned once and kept forever. It was something you chose again and again. When she began to play, the fear softened. The piano welcomed her like it always had. She didn't play to impress. She played to be honest. That was enough. Afterward, someone asked her what had changed. She thought for a long moment before answering. She said that she had stopped waiting for permission. The video from that first night continued to spread, but she stopped watching it. Not because she disliked it, but because she didn't want to live only in that moment. She wanted to move forward, carrying it with her instead of standing inside it. She made time for music again. Not every day, not perfectly, but often enough to feel grounded. Some days she played for an hour. Some days just a few minutes. What mattered was that she showed up. People still asked her why she had waited so long. She never had a simple answer. Life was complicated. Dreams didn't always disappear. Sometimes they just went quiet. One evening, she returned to the same hall, this time as a guest, not a surprise. She walked across the same floor, remembered the same lights, felt smaller now, less intimidating. Familiar. She stood on the empty stage before the audience arrived and looked out at the rows of seats. She thought about the version of herself who had walked up those steps with no expectations, no plan. That version felt distant, but also brave. When the hall filled again, the sound was different. People came with intention. They listened differently too. Still, she played as if it were just her and the piano. The applause was warm, steady, grateful. But what stayed with her most was not the clapping. It was the quiet moments before and after the music. The shared stillness. Later that night, she sat alone, hands resting in her lap, feeling tired in a good way. She thought about how easily the moment could have passed. How close she had come to staying in her seat that first night. She realized that courage often arrives quietly. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it looks like a raised hand in the back of a room. Her life did not change overnight in every way. There were still bills to pay, worries to manage, ordinary days to live. But there was also music again. Real music played without apology. She received messages from people who said her story had inspired them to return to something they loved. Painting, writing, singing, even small joys they had forgotten. She never claimed to have all the answers. She only shared what she knew now, that it was never too late to listen to the part of yourself that still hopes. On quiet mornings, she played with the windows open, letting the sound drift out. She imagined it reaching someone who needed it, even if she would never know. The stranger who had once been invited for fun was no longer a stranger to herself. She had found her way back, one note at a time. And though the hall would remember that night for years, the truest change had happened long before the applause. It had happened the moment she chose to sit down, place her hands on the keys, and believe that her voice still mattered.